The head of the newly created Strategic Air Command was General Curtis E. LeMay. He had commanded the B-29 offensive against Japan in the Pacific. LeMay had a reputation as a confrontationist, what we might today call a hawk.
Well, he was a general who really didn't particularly care for civilians. He was a fighting general from World War II. He had commanded bombing attacks in both Europe and in Japan. So he was a World War general with the kind of attitudes you would expect in a successful general from that period.
Now, LeMay sought the ultimate bomber to counter the new Soviet threat, one powered by nuclear engines and capable of remaining airborne indefinitely. This would be America's principal weapon in any future world war.
In military terms, setting it in the right historical context, this was a great idea, because what it meant was that you could build a bomber that was not constrained by the amount of fuel it carried. So you could have a nuclear bomber, nuclear-powered, carrying nuclear weapons, airborne, all the time, watching and waiting for the enemy.
But LeMay and the Air Force were not trusted by someone in high office, President Harry Truman.
President Truman was very worried about leaving this awesome power of the atom solely in the hands of the military. So he created a civilian body, the Atomic Energy Commission, the AEC, responsible directly to himself and the office of the president. And this would control all nuclear research, it would control the nuclear reactors, and this really annoyed the generals, it would keep under lock and key the atomic bombs.
The Atomic Energy Commission identified a series of uses for an atom-powered aircraft. First, as a long-range bomber. Power from a nuclear reactor would theoretically allow an aircraft to fly for months without refueling, using only tiny amounts of uranium. Another possibility was the flying boat.
The Atomic Energy Commission's pet team of academics at MIT thought that one of the prime candidates for a nuclear-powered aircraft was a passenger flying boat. In those days, air traffic was still very underdeveloped. There weren't that many big airfields could take passenger planes. So flying port to port was quite a good idea. Also, an atomic reactor in an aircraft is quite heavy, and a flying boat was big enough to carry it. So that looked like a good bet.
Indeed, before the age of the jet, the flying boat seemed the most promising aircraft for long-haul civil aviation. The design also allowed for more passengers to be carried in a greater degree of comfort. Millionaire Howard Hughes built the Spruce Goose to carry passengers across the Atlantic non-stop. And in England, Saunders Roe were building the elegant Princess flying boat. It was intended for the growing transatlantic market.
They were developing a docking system. In fact, that was in use at Southampton, so you no longer were taken out to your flying boat in motorboats. You'd walked aboard it from docks, and there would have been docks at either end, drive the aeroplane in, tie it up, and then walk ashore.
The Princess was one of the largest aircraft ever built.
Well, it was a double-decker, so we had upper and lower decks. We had provision for cocktail bars and all the rest of it, and double-berth cabins. It was definitely going to be an upmarket luxury way of crossing the Atlantic in about 7.5 hours.
An atom-powered flying boat might have other uses. Atomic power was also being developed for a new generation of submarines that could lurk for months under the sea. New flying boats with atomic engines would have the range to hunt them down. September 1949. A lone US B-29 reconnaissance bomber picks up samples of radioactive material high above the Soviet Union. Russia had joined the nuclear club. The next year, North Korea invaded South Korea. The Cold War had turned hot. These events were to accelerate the plan for an American atom-powered bomber.
Congressional Joint Committee on Atomic Energy was very much in favor of going ahead with promoting and going ahead with the nuclear bomber. The Atomic Energy Commission itself also was. They developed eventually a special subdivision which did that work. And within the Department of Defense, the Department of the Air Force, there were a lot of great hopes for the nuclear airplane.
In 1951, the Atomic Energy Commission ordered into production the world's first experimental nuclear-powered aircraft.
The designated aim, as stated in 1951, was to produce 2 flying test beds, so 2 flying nuclear-powered aircraft by 1957. And the program started with a series of testing the shielding requirements for the crew.
The major issue was how to protect the pilot and crew from the effects of radiation coming from the reactor. One solution that was seriously canvassed was only using older crew to fly the aircraft. The theory being that they would be irradiated to some degree anyway, but if they were beyond child-rearing age, then it wouldn't matter so much.
You had to use all these tricks, like base it on uninhabited islands and things like that. Use old men for the pilots so that the effect of radiation on the gene, on the sperm would not get into children. They were going to have pilots, they called them the NEPA man.
To gain experience in dealing with radiation shielding, it was decided to build a flying reactor before the atomic engines were ready.
Well, they were talking about special aircraft because nobody knew how much it was going to weigh, but it looked like it was going to weigh an awful lot.
So the US Air Force turned to its biggest aircraft, the mighty Convair B-36 bomber. The B-36 was the largest American bomber ever built. It had a wingspan of 70 meters and a range of 13,000 kilometers. At first, the B-36 was powered by 6 conventional propeller engines, but later versions saw the addition of 4 jet engines for greater speed and load carrying, giving rise to the phrase 6 turning, 4 burning. Aircrew called it the aluminium overcoat.
The B-36 for the first time gave the American Air Force the capacity of what we now call global reach, global power. That is, that you can reach anywhere in the world with a bomber and influence events there through bombing them.
In 1953, an ordinary B-36 bomber was selected as a testbed for the atomic bomber program. It was modified to carry a small reactor in the aft bomb bay. The reactor was not connected to the engines. A new nose section housed a 12-ton lead and rubber shielded compartment for the crew of 5, pilot, co-pilot, flight engineer, and 2 nuclear engineers.